Hello, thank you for joining the program for public consultation. We'll be waiting a couple of seconds for additional attendees to join us, and we'll get started in the next minute or so. Thank you so much for coming. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's event presented by the Program for Public Consultation at the University of Maryland School of Public Policy, an organization that uses innovative methods and technology to consult the public and policy issues facing the nation. Today, we will be releasing a new report named Americans on Proposals in the 2022 Reconciliation Budget. We'll begin with a presentation of the report, followed by a discussion with experts in the field. We will open the conversation to questions from the audience later on in the program. To kick us off with a presentation of the report findings is Stephen Kull. Dr. Stephen Kull is a political psychologist and director of the Program for Public Consultation at the University of Maryland, who has been studying public opinion on public policy for nearly 3 decades. He also founded and serves as president of Voice of the People, a nonpartisan organization seeking to give the public a greater voice in government decision-making. Neither organization takes a position on policy issues. Now I'll turn it over to Stephen Kull.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming. What we have here today is not one survey, but quite a lot of surveys that we drew on to try to assess the question, how do Americans feel about the proposals in the 2022 reconciliation budget? And we have data that will cover, we have a problem here. Oh, there we go, okay. We have polling data to cover 28 proposals in the budget reconciliation framework. Now, 16 of them were tested using the method we use at the Program for Public Consultation. And this is an in-depth method where we first give people a briefing on the issue, and then they evaluate arguments pro and con. And all the content is reviewed by proponents and opponents of the proposals. We also have 3 proposals tested by the Center for Deliberative Democracy, which uses something called deliberative polling, where they get actually a group of people together for a weekend and give them briefings before they evaluate the proposals. Then we draw on standard polls from a whole variety of sources, basically everything we could find. So here, I'm going to give you the cheat sheet right off the bat. Of the proposals that we tested, overall, all 28 received majority support, including majorities of Democrats and independents. When you turn to Republicans, the story is more complex. For 14 of the proposals, they got majority support. For 2, it was plurality support. For 5, there was clear majority opposition. For 1, there was plurality opposition, and for 6, they were roughly divided, or it was somewhat variable in different surveys, and you'll see that as we go along. So starting with healthcare, one proposal is to allow the federal government to negotiate with drug companies to get lower prices, which would be used by both Medicare and private insurance companies. And this gets large bipartisan majority support. I'm not going to show you all of the surveys because there are too many, but they are in the report. So I'm going to give you some examples as we go along. As you can see here in this poll from the Kaiser Family Foundation, overwhelming majorities nationally and in both parties supported the proposal. When they did a deliberative poll where people were able to discuss it and ask questions to experts, support was even higher. Another proposal is to expand Medicare coverage to include dental, vision, and hearing. Here again, this gets large bipartisan majority support from this morning consult poll, 84% overall, 79% among Republicans, and 89% among Democrats, 84 independents. Another proposal is to lower the Medicare eligibility age to 60 years old. And this gets large majority support overall and a plurality among Republicans, 61% overall, and among Republicans, 49% in favor, 38% opposed, Democrats, 75%. Another proposal related to healthcare is to increase the supply and affordability of home healthcare services and to increase wages and benefits for home healthcare workers. And this gets overall, for the proposal itself, which doesn't call out low income households, this gets large bipartisan majority support, as in this case. However, when it is called out that the support would be for people with low incomes to receive this long-term care in their own homes, it drops to half of Republicans in support. Another proposal is to fill the Medicaid gap by providing health insurance to those who would be covered by Medicaid had their state expanded it under the ACA. And this gets bipartisan majority support. Not a majority of Republicans, but still a majority, and more than 2/3 overall. Another proposal is to increase ACA, Affordable Care Act subsidies, which lowers premiums and deductibles. And here the support varies. This is from the Jim Fishkin's Center for Deliberative Democracy's deliberative poll. And you do have large majorities and a slight majority of Republicans favoring raising the income cutoff. So more middle income buyers get these subsidies when they get their service through their insurance through the marketplace. But increasing subsidies for low income buyers of insurance, that does not get majority support among Republicans. Now turning to the environment, there are a whole series of tax credits for clean energy production and for energy efficiency improvements. And this gets large bipartisan majorities in support. Here, these are ones that we did for subsidies, or rather tax credits, for the cost of clean energy producing equipment, and the tax credit would be up to 30% of the equipment. You get 3/4 overall supporting it, including a pretty robust majority of Republicans and overwhelming majority of Democrats. And for electricity produced with clean energy, which would be 5 to 10% of the average retail price, once again, you get 3/4 overall, and more than 6 in 10 Republicans. Energy efficiency improvements, all of these get bipartisan support for new energy efficient homes, for home energy saving improvements. All these, by the way, it's all spelled out how much they are, and and you can see all the details in the report. But for energy efficient heating or air conditioning, for new energy efficient commercial buildings, it starts dropping off a little bit when it comes to commercial buildings, and then energy saving improvements to commercial buildings and so on. But still, right to the end, you still have bipartisan majority support. Another proposal is to establish a civilian climate corps that would work on conservation, climate resilience, and environmental justice projects. And large bipartisan majorities have supported similar proposals. Here's one from Yale to reestablish the Civilian Conservation Corps, which would employ workers to protect natural ecosystems, plant trees, and so on, restore soil. And that gets overwhelming support nationally and 3/4 of Republicans. Here's another one that we did some years ago. The proposal was to have implement or have ready to go in the event of an economic downturn, this rather large program that would employ 750,000 people at a cost of $30 billion a year. big numbers. And this got very large support, 80% overall, and 7 in 10 Republicans. Another proposal is to increase the supply of electric vehicles, in part through providing tax credits. And this is interesting. You get bipartisan majority support for electric buses, but it gets a little more mixed when you get to electric cars. Here, there's this proposal for 10% of the sales price of each bus sold. It gets 7 in 10 nationally and a slight majority of Republicans. But when it comes to a new electric car, it drops 63% overall, and less than half of Republicans support it. I think they're kind of going, I think we're talking about Tesla buyers here. I don't know if they need help. Now, it is important to note that in other polling, they do show support for charging stations, including Republicans. Now, there was another proposal for people making under $30,000 a tax credit for the purchase of a used electric car, and that still did not get majority support from Republicans, only 42%. But overall, it did get support. Now, something we did some drilling down into the demographics, and I'm going to touch on that here and there, because we found rather regularly there was a significant difference among younger Republicans. And in this particular case, of those 18 to 34, 53% favored it, and 35 to 44, 42%, right, 52%. So turning to families and children, the idea of extending the child tax credit reforms, which increased the amount of the credit and made them fully refundable. The majority overall supports the idea, but Republicans are divided, or a plurality is in favor. Here's one from Morning Consult, 57% overall favored it, but Republicans were divided. And another one that was a slight plurality in favor. Another proposal is to provide all workers with 12 weeks of family and medical leave. Now, overall, the majority supports it, however it's presented, but among Republicans, it's divided when it's specified that it would be through a new payroll tax, but a majority opposes it when there's no specified funding source, which is currently the proposal. So here's the one where it's spelled out that there would be this payroll tax split between employers and employees, and you got about half of Republicans. By the way, we also break out sometimes the congressional districts based on where people live, and people in very red districts, a majority supported, as well as a majority in very blue districts. But here's the case where it was not spelled out. It was also mentioned what the cost would be. That may have been a factor as well, but support drops rather quite a lot among Republicans. Still, you get 6 in 10 nationally, but just 35%. But in congressional, very red congressional districts, you still get a majority, as well as in very blue. And here's another example where 18 to 34-year-olds are quite different. Here you have 56% support for this proposal for paid family and medical leave that would not have a dedicated tax. Another proposals for subsidizing childcare that would be free for low-income parents, and for middle-income families, they would pay no more than 7% of their income. And this again gets overall majority support among Republicans. You get in standard polling, there's this plurality in favor. Whoops, I got the order there. We don't have this slide here. In standard polling, you do get support for it among Republicans, but it drops when people go through the pros and cons, as in our process. So when they really think about it more, there's more resistance. Another proposal is to extend the additional summer SNAP benefits that have been in place now for a while. They're about $130 a month. These were put in place during the pandemic to provide low-income families SNAP benefits for, primarily low-income families with children, because during the summer they normally would get these meals at schools and so on. And so the majority overall supports making this permanent, but the majority of Republicans are opposed, just 44%, but there is support in very red districts. But here again, among 18 to 34-year-olds, you do get a majority in support of these increased SNAP benefits for children during the summer. Another proposal is to fund the renovation and creation of new public housing and provide additional rental assistance. For what we have, the majority is supportive, and a slight majority or a plurality of Republicans is in favor. Here's an example: increasing housing options for low-income households, though it even specifically mentions Biden's infrastructure plan, though that did not get through in the infrastructure plan, and thus it's in the reconciliation budget. So you do get a slight majority of Republicans there, 7%, 7 to 10 overall. For providing funding to renovate and build new public K through 12 schools, here you get robust bipartisan majority support, 7 and 10 overall, 6 and 10 Republicans. Though it's spelled out $100 billion in President Biden, as again mentioned. Increasing the size of the Pell Grants for higher education for low-income students, that does get bipartisan majority support, 7 and 10 overall, and it's spelled out that it would increase from around $6,500 to around $8,300 a year, and that it would cost about $8.5 billion a year, 7 and 10 overall, and 53% of Republicans. Providing free preschool programs to all 3 and 4-year-olds. Again, you got majority support overall, but Republicans' views vary. Here's one case where it was a plurality opposed. It was spelled out that would be part of the Biden's $1.8 trillion economic spending plan. Another case, though, it was just spelled out that it would be a free preschool program as part of the infrastructure package, and that got a clear plurality in favor. Now, providing 2 years of tuition-free community college, a little complicated. The majority supports the idea, but Republicans, it's less than half, just a third supported the idea. But when we had a follow-on question, we said, we gave people a few reasons for why they might not support it. 12% of the whole sample said it wasn't that they didn't think that this should happen, but they thought it should go for all higher education, not just community college, which is interesting. That brings up the number to 44% who support some kind of support for higher education in the first 2 years. Providing tuition assistance to students attending minority serving higher education institutions or historically Black universities and colleges. Majorities or plurality support overall, but not a majority of Republicans, and 55% opposed that idea in this Morning Consult poll. For immigration, creating a new long-term visa with a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants if they have a clean criminal record, they've been in the US for some time, and they pay any taxes that they owe. And this gets bipartisan majority support. Now, and here's the case, and we gave them the full support, full description of the proposal, and then you get this support. You also, by the way, get robust bipartisan support for DACA, the Dreamers. But if it's not spelled out, if it's just visa for undocumented immigrants, then you get divided responses among Republicans. It's what's key for them, it seems to be, is to hear the full set of requirements. For workforce development, increasing funding for workforce development and job training in high demand sectors. This does very well. Robust support for job training programs in cybersecurity and the energy industry. And for the registered apprenticeship program, that gets extremely high support, very bipartisan, for a tax credit up to $5,000 for each new apprentice. Raising the corporate tax rate to 28%, a large majority supports that, but Republican views are roughly divided, about half, kind of varies in different surveys, but it's but this sort of shows the basic pattern. But raising income and capital gains tax rates for those earning over $400,000, that gets large majority supports. Now, Republicans, it's a little more complicated. In principle, 3/4 say the wealthiest Americans should pay higher taxes, and 2/3 of Republicans agree. But when you get into the specifics, raising taxes on households making 400,000 to pay for infrastructure improvements, then you get a divided response, though 2/3 of the public overall favor it. Now, in the context of a budget exercise that we did, where they were looking at all those spending sources and they had got input about the budget deficit and so on, then you do get support. Nationally 2/3, but among a majority of Republicans, to raise tax rates for incomes over 200,000 to the level they were before the 27 tax reforms, and also for raising taxes on capital gains and dividends by treating them as ordinary income for income above 1 million. And that got 75% overall and 69% of Republicans. Increasing the IRS's tax enforcement, particularly those making over 400,000. A large majority supports that, but a slight majority of Republicans opposes the idea, though you do have support in very red districts as well as very blue districts. So this is another example where 18 to 34-year-olds are in favor, 57%, and a slight majority, 35 to 44. So here's again, coming back to the cheat sheet. In summary, overall, there were 28 proposals tested, and 28 of them got majority support nationally and among Democrats and independents. 14 of them, half of them got majority support among Republicans, 2 plurality support. 5, there was majority opposition. In case you're wondering, those 5 were tax credits for electric cars, extending the SNAP benefits, free community college, minority serving colleges, and IRS enforcement. And 3 of those 5 were supported by 18 to 34-year-olds. And overall, for 18 to 34-year-olds, we didn't have the data in every case, but at least 20 of the proposals got majority support among 18 to 34-year-olds. And again, in one case, it was a plurality opposed, and in 6 cases, it was variable or roughly divided. All right, I will stop my share there.
Great. Now, to facilitate our panel discussion, we would like to welcome Alayna Treene. Alayna Treene is a congressional reporter at Axios. She is a co-author of the weekly Axios Sneak Peek newsletter and covers Capitol Hill, the Biden administration, and elections. She appeared as a political analyst on C-SPAN News, and MSNBC. It's yours.
Thank you, JP, and thank you, Steve, for hosting us all today and for the work you've done to bring to light the public's view on these critical issues that impact so many people. These findings are informative and timely, and as many of you know, Congress and Capitol Hill is focused on one of the largest legislative proposals that we've seen in many years, the reconciliation plan. We have an expert and esteemed panel today to discuss the report. Steve and Kull just briefed us on, and I'd like to introduce them to you. So first, we were joined by Karlyn Bowman. She's currently a distinguished senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. At AEI, she compiles and analyzes American public opinion using available polling data on a variety of subjects. And you can read more of her work in her weekly column for Forbes.com. Thank you, Karlyn, for being with us. We also have Celinda Lake. Celinda Lake is one of the Democratic Party's leading political strategists. She was one of 2 lead pollsters for the Biden campaign in 2020. Celinda and her firm, Lake Research Partners, have become one of the most respected Democratic polling firms in the country. And lastly, we are joined again by Steve and Kull of the Program for Public Consultation. Thank you all for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be a great discussion, and there's a lot for us to dig into in that report. And you know, there's so much in this 3.5 trillion as of now package. So I think we should just dive right in. The first point of discussion that I wanted to get to was what you find surprising from this report, especially key provisions or issues that you find more or less than expected. And Karlyn, we can start with you.
Thank you very much, Alayna, and thank you, Steve, for inviting me. And Celinda, it's good to see you again after a very long time. I admire Celinda's work enormously. If I could just step back for a moment and talk a little bit more broadly about polls and then move into your specific question. I think polls are an invaluable tool to understand a complex public like ours. They tell us what people aspire to. They tell us what Americans think is important. And I think this very comprehensive and timely report gives us a sense of the things that Americans value. I think that's how they answer many poll questions. What I don't think they can do, because I do think in many ways they're a very crude and blunt instrument, I don't think that they can give us a lot of specific information. For example, today on Capitol Hill, based on what Axios reported, Rich Neal is going to be discussing his paid family leave proposal, and Christy Gillibrand has a completely different not completely different, but a different approach to that very important issue, which I think the public broadly supports. So in that sense, I think that we have to be careful in how much we interpret specific findings about specific legislative guidance. But that said, I guess what stood out to me most from the report was the just enormous consistency that you see across the public polls and the polls that the Project on Public Consultation has done, and the deliberative polling too, just remarkable consistency. And a lot of the findings, it seemed to me, are very familiar. For example, we know that Republicans are generally a little less enthusiastic about enlarging the role of the federal government, about more government spending, though in many of these cases, they clearly wanted the government to play a major role. We know that Democrats are more enthusiastic. We know that young people generally, and this doesn't surprise me about young Republicans, they're generally more action oriented. They want to get things done. They want to move ahead. And so I think that reflects some of the differences that we saw between younger Republicans and Republicans as a whole. It's clear from all of these data that Americans want the federal government to do a lot. And they particularly, at least it seems from the findings in the report, give strong government support to areas where the federal government has had a major involvement for a very long time, the healthcare issues in particular, education issues, and those were some of the highest polling numbers overall. We also know, as I said, that Democrats and Republicans differ consistently in a lot of areas, but clearly they want government to do a lot. What I don't think we get from this exercise, and I think it's very, very important, is that while at the same time Americans want the government to do a lot, they also believe it's wasteful, it's inefficient, and too expensive. And none of the questions really, it seems to me, get at that powerful sentiment in public opinion over many decades. I mean, most public polls do show support for the $3.5 trillion infrastructure, or excuse me, social spending part of the infrastructure plan. But I just don't think Americans have embraced modern monetary theory. I think they have different views about the proper role of government, and they're of two minds, with the pendulum swinging back and forth between more assertive government doing more things and smaller government doing less things. So that's just an introduction to your question about surprises.
Well, thank you for that answer, Karlyn. And I do think what you prefaced with is very important to note, that they are still very much in the drafting phases of this bill. Their deadline right now to finish it is by September 15th. I think that'll maybe get pushed back from what I'm hearing from my sourcing on Capitol Hill, but you're totally right that a lot of this is in flux. And I do think that the early polls are helping actually really a lot of these leaders in Congress to decipher how far they want to go with some of these provisions, just given how ambitious and in many ways progressive this package is. And so I think the points that you made are very important, and I'm glad you brought them up. Celinda, I would love to hear your thoughts as well on things that you find very surprising, and just to put it in the context of your larger work of polling and what you've seen over the past several years, and particularly in the past several months regarding some of these topics.
So thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Stephen. Just an amazing report, and so clearly laid out, and I think such an invaluable resource. I want to share it with everyone I know. And Alayna, I always love your insights and really rely on them to understand what's going on in Axios' insights. And then Karlyn, it's so great to see you again. And I want to echo back my great respect. I was less surprised because we've been monitoring a lot of this data in an ongoing way for the DNC and others. But I would say, I think two surprises for giving conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom, and if you're listening on the Hill, you would think, gosh, we would be lucky if 10% of Republicans supported any of these proposals. And so surprise number one is just the astounding level of support, a majority of Republicans for so many of the proposals. And I agree with you. And what's interesting is the specifics generate more support and consensus than the broad themes. I mean, if we had a broad conversation about role of government, waste in government, liberty, whatever it would be, you would see those factions polarize immediately. But when we're talking about specific proposals, there tends to be much more support. What's interesting is I think also independents are resembling Democrats. Like Democrats are wildly enthusiastic about all of this. But independents are very, very high. And independents right now are very ornery. One of the newest trends is how upset independents are at the economy. They're lowering job performance numbers for the president, deserved or not. Their real sense of pressure and disappointment over COVID in the economy. And so to see independents so robustly in support of these proposals when they're so cynical is another real surprise. I think what's really interesting, and Karlyn, I'd love to talk more about this, and I think, Stephen, it's a great area to explore. I think we may be on the cusp of some real reorientation about the role of government. And I think there are two things that are going on that are really, really interesting. One is you have a young cohort that is very, very pro-government, and you do see that distinction by age. And Karlyn, you said it so well, of activism among younger Republicans. I would add to that Republican women, and particularly younger Republican women. And in the newest data that hasn't been included in the report, but if you look at some things like the Texas abortion decision and some of these other things, if you look at the newest data just released today on parental leave, you see the Republican women, and particularly younger Republican women, those Republican moms, suburban moms, really coming over to the side of the package and dragging their men with them rather than the other way around. The other thing is we have, if you look at this array of actions, it is really an array of universal benefits. And we have not had a conversation about universal benefits. Some of these are very targeted, but a lot of them are not that targeted. They're for everybody. And I think there's a really interesting development through the pandemic and the COVID experience that people see a role for government, for everyone in such a disaster. And is that going, I don't think we even know the answer to that. Is that going to shift the way people relate to some of these things over the long run? Is this a Roosevelt moment or a post-World War II moment where we really did have a conversation about universal benefits? Finally, or two other quick things. One of the things I think that this report does, I hope that it is taken very seriously by all Democrats, because we keep fussing and fuming about 1 trillion, 3.5 trillion. And when we're doing focus groups, people can't even keep the number straight. It's like billion, gazillion, billion, whatever. I mean, these are just ridiculous numbers in people's minds. And what it shows is when you talk about what the money buys, that's how to sell it, not to talk about whether we're arbitrarily at 1 million or 3.5 or 2.6 or 7.8 or whatever. And Americans not that good at math to begin with. So I think it really is a reminder, don't sell, sell the brownie, not the brownie mix here. And then the last thing, I thought the softness of Republicans reflected some of the things, Karlyn, you were saying, but also reflected and really revealed in a systematic way some triggers for Republicans. So Republicans are very for healthcare proposals until they're told they're attached to ACA, which I think they don't like, or making anything about the pandemic permanent. Doesn't bother Democrats, but it's like, because they're at hello, but the Republicans resist the making something that was supposed to be temporary now permanent. So there's some interesting reveals, I think, in some of this deliberative democracy that you've raised and some of the question wording analysis that hadn't been as clear until we got this great report about what are some triggers for Republicans too, that I think are lessons that are very interesting.
Those are all incredible points and ones that I, as a reporter covering Congress and the White House, I always want to answer more of. And I think that was what I also found very enlightening from this, is just, especially when we look at politics over the last several years and leading up to the Trump administration and now the Biden administration, is the polarization, but not of, a lot of it is because of the politics of this and less of the actual substance of some of these policies. And I think that's, for me, what I found very enlightening about this report, and looking at the support from some of these polls for these topics. And like you said, Celinda, until you realize what it might be tied to or the implications it might have down the road. Stephen, I also just want to give you an opportunity to address what you found surprising, but also, I mean, you are obviously very familiar with the report, and things that you expect potentially to change from that, what we should learn from the public opinion, but what might change because of the public opinion that might affect the policy as they are still in the drafting process.
Well, clearly what's striking here is that there does seem to be some kind of emerging consensus for some larger role for the government in some areas. The next question is which ones, how much, and things like that. But even Republicans show a readiness for some kind of expanded role. Now, yes, they do have ambivalence about it. When we do the pro and con arguments, we nearly always have a con argument in there saying, well, government is wasteful and we don't like the government, and it's better for the market to take care of these things. We include those arguments, and Republicans respond to those arguments. And in many cases, you have Republicans who a majority found that con argument convincing, but they also find a majority of Republicans find the pro argument convincing because they do see the need for some of these issues. So I think it's better to think of people as being more ambivalent, struggling within themselves than one side or the other. Though you kind of, when you hear the debates in Congress, you think Democrats are inherently in favor of growing the government, and Republicans are inherently opposed to it. So there is this debate, and now the debate isn't just swing there, because in the end they do come down sometimes in big majorities in favor of one side or opposed. And I think that really needs to be part of the process. One of the things Americans really don't like is that government in Congress is like a power struggle, and they perceive that behind it all, you've got interests on one side, interests on the other, and they gain control of members and the parties, and then they clash, and then there's a winner. What they want to see more is a deliberative process, thinking through, how much is this bias? Is this really helpful? Does this have some downsides? What should we consider? Particularly, what are the potential downsides? And through that process, shaping and refining a proposal. And again, I think though the bottom line is, I don't think that it certainly doesn't look like all that's in the budget reconciliation plan, and even among the ones that we tested, that there is consensus, but there is consensus for some larger role and a receptivity to that, and so it would be fortunate in terms of public engagement for the debate to not be so either or, but under what circumstances and so on, which ones are really effective, and that would give and the public makes it very clear that's what they think should be happening in Congress. And, there is such a tendency to think that Congress is a mirror of the public. After all, they elected them, but that's consistently shown to not be the case. It's much more complex than that.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you for that insight, Stephen. And I feel like we could talk about this report for hours, but I do want to move this on to questions soon. But I'm going to ask, I want to ask for each of you to kind of give us your parting, final, like your bottom line, like you just had, Steve. I'd like to know what you might have as a bottom line, Karlyn, and also, just as we think about this report in the context of how this bill is moving forward right now and toward potential passage in the next several weeks, the key thing that you think that people need to keep in mind as we consider this and consider the topics that are garnering such consensus.
Well, I'll be quick here. I think I loved Celinda's phrase about the Roosevelt moment. I'm not sure we're there, but certainly a public that lived through the financial crisis and then the pandemic wants government to play a more active role. We had a number of polls in the summer and the fall showing stronger support for a more activist role by government, but those have started ticking down again, and I'm not sure entirely why. But that said, I think people want the government to do a lot. What I want to see is more of the bottom line kind of work overall. And I think that there are also just a lot of impediments that are going to come up very quickly for many of these provisions. Will the parliamentarian rule them as passing muster? There are just so many things like that. Will CBO or the tax score it? And if it's not paid for, how will the public react? There are just so many things like this that could come up. So it's a continuing story. And so I'll leave it there.
I think one of the areas and an area I'd love to see for the next work, Karlyn, from your all's long-term thinking, and Stephen from your work, I think one of the questions is there is so much here that's possible. And there's two different ways to look at it. One is, I want it all. How could you vote against this provision? And one is, okay, well, let's just get 8 of the 9 and move on. And what's interesting in terms of, Stephen, your note about deliberative democracy, which I think is really an interesting point, that the public has some real appetite for this deliberation. The one exception for that is Democrats. Democrats want to get things done, and they're getting impatient now. And they want to get things done. Democratic voters over deliberating about it, bringing unity. Yeah, bipartisanship is nice, but if you can't get it, let's just go. So I think there's this process juggling, and I wonder, Karlyn, if one of the reasons for the decline in role of government is actually the increase in cynicism. What we're seeing in our data is not that the increase is in opposition for these proposals. Many of them have been stagnant. Some of them are getting stronger, but people's cynicism about government is really increasing. And I haven't studied this. I don't even have the data to study it, but I think it would be a great question to look at and see if that is one of the explanations for the seeming leveling off a little bit of declining government. It's not that people don't want it, but they don't expect they can get it.
Yeah, the cynicism is clearly there, but I also think things like rising gas prices, rising inflation, rising grocery bills are making people have some second thoughts about where they are on some of these programs, though the programs still have pretty solid majority support.
Or they could be increasing the role for government. I mean, one of the things I've argued is, let's go, like the prescription drug proposals, which were at the top of the list. They are one of our best answers to inflation. You're right, costs are going up. We're going to go after them. And this is one place where price gouging is happening and Democrats are going to take them down. So it could work either way, I think.
That's a good point.
Steve, I'd love to know any of your final thoughts.
Yeah, well, this question of how, the conflict about, well, it'd be great to get these things done, but the government isn't really that effective. It's problematic. It's dominated by special interests. There's potential for fraud. All of these are part of it. And what we try to do was we try to put respondents in the shoes of policymakers. We call what we take them through a policymaking simulation. And by the way, anybody who wants to can go online and go through these processes themselves. If you go to vop.org and go to the policymaking simulations, you can experience them yourself and send your message on to your members of Congress about your opinions. But the key thing is that it's just not it's for most Americans, it's not an either or. And for most, they're trying to in some way achieve some right balance, some kind of integration of these concerns, and that's why it's always, I mean, Democrats are kind of in a mode right now. Hey, we're running out of time. We may lose one of the houses of Congress or both of them in the midterm. So hey, let's get some things done. But still, most Americans are supportive of a deliberative process, of a balancing. They're not very few Americans are all just completely gung ho spenders, or just completely opposed to any government role. And if Congress could sort of in that way represent the American people more, we might get more things done.
I think those are great points. And two things I just want to bring up from this conversation that I often hear from members every day or when I'm on the Hill is, one, you can't let perfection be the evil of the good or of getting things done. They always say that. We've heard this with police reform and other things, that you get really close to something, but then it can't be an all or nothing thing. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this bill. And then as for consensus, I totally agree with your point, Steve. I think that we see so much of people trying to, and I think the media and myself are probably part of this problem, point out the divide between members and different politicians. But when you do think about it, particularly if you look at Democrats and Republicans, it's normally the people who are closer to the center that represent the most of the country. And sometimes it's those who are on more of the fringe sides who are the loudest voices. And so it's interesting to see how that public opinion and what you're discussing of where people stand was relayed in the report. So I really appreciate all of your insights. But now we're going to move to question and answer. And I want everyone in the audience to have an opportunity to ask your question. You can submit them using the Q&A function on Zoom in the bottom right-hand corner, or if you prefer, you can raise a virtual hand to ask your question live to the panel and the audience. We ask that you please include your name and organization, and we'll just go through the list in order of which we've received. So let's see what we have first. Question one is from Michael Ruby. And he asks, it seems that Republicans tend to give less support for programs that primarily benefit the low income. Any idea why that division? Any of you feel free, Karlyn, Celinda, or Stephen, to take that question.
There may be a perception on the part of Republicans that there's already a lot of programs. There's already Medicaid. There's already school lunch programs. So I think it's not that there's opposition to low income programs for low income per se. It's more relative to what they perceive in place now.
I think it triggers, of course, I'm going to answer this as the Democrats, so Karlyn, you're going to have to definitely jump in here, but I think it triggers the things that just don't enter into it for Democrats and for a lot of independents, like who's deserving, are you working or not? Did you take responsibility, what personal responsibility? We're the ones who say, it's hard to pull yourself up by your bootstraps if you don't have boots. They're the ones that say, enough of handouts, you need to be deserving, you need to take personal responsibility. I think there's a sense, I think there is some race, and I really don't think we can ignore that, and racism in people's responses and racial stereotyping about these programs. But I must tell you, if you want to know the question, it's such a great question that is being asked, because if you had asked me what astounded me as a person, not as a pollster the most, it was the food stamp question. It's like, what are you doing? How can you be for people being hungry, which is why I'm a Democrat, even though I was born and raised a Republican. But you know, that is obviously triggering a whole set of two very different schemas for the two parties.
Yeah. I don't work on anything for either of the parties, but I do think Republicans have suffered from the perception for a very long time that they care less about the whole. And I think you have a new generation of Republicans that are trying to counter that, and we'll see if they're going to be successful. The B team is really quite impressive on those kind of core principles and messages. So we'll see.
Thank you each for your questions. Next, we have a live question from Sheldon Appleton, a former political science professor. So Sheldon, please feel free to come in and ask your question.
Sheldon, you're muted if you're saying anything.
Yeah, okay. I would like to make I was trying to make the same point about race, and I would like to see a racial resentment scale cross-tabbed against some of these items where Republicans are willing to support programs for middle class people, but not for low income. And I wonder too, is there a group for whom low income really means Black people, maybe Hispanic people too?
Really good suggestion, and I think it would be very revealing to apply that.
It is worth noting that one of the lowest level of support was for the proposal for historically Black colleges and universities.
And just to weigh in on that as well, I think this was something we saw a lot of during discussions. I'm having a lot of flashbacks from some of what we saw in this report to the discussion over the American Rescue Package and COVID relief and the types of programs that you know, we just saw very much be divisive between the parties, and many of them do. I think you can't ignore the question of racial minorities and economic, you know, diversity as well, weighing on some of this. And I think that there are probably polls that we should be doing more of, or you all could be doing more of, to show some of this. But I do think that I know a lot of them are happening at the same time as well, sometimes retroactively. But I'll move on to the next question because I know we're running low on time. The next question is from Ellen Barfield, Veterans for Peace. Ellen asks, can't afford it is the perennial refrain, but taxing billionaires and corporations that pay almost no taxes, along with massive cuts to the Pentagon, would never cover massive human needs. Surely responses vary when that is noted.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And two things that I think are very revealing in the report and very, very revealing externally. So two things that are going on in the data. One of the most important and positive proposals is how these things are paid for. I mean, when you say they're going to be paid for by corporations that haven't paid taxes, and 55 very profitable corporations during the pandemic paid zero in taxes. That is actually one of the most positive proposals. It's not just a very popular way to pay for the program, it is a very positive proposal in its own right. And then when you reassure people that no one under 400,000 is going to be paying taxes, increase in taxes, there's just a very, very profound agreement there. And I'll turn it to you, Stephen, to talk about, but we didn't even get, most of these polls don't even get into any questions of reallocation from the military budget. I will say this, in talking about a solid majority of Americans still support getting the president's proposal, still support getting out of Afghanistan. And the single most popular framing of that we've seen in our work, not for the administration, but for other clients, is we need to bring our troops and our money home. So people are well aware that these international involvements and wars are costing a lot of money. So, but Stephen, you had some data in the
Yeah,
report.
yeah, we've done a fair amount of work on this where we give people the budget. We say here's the discretionary budget broken into 35 line items, and then here are all these revenue sources where you can adjust tax rates and make new taxes and things like that. And then they can propose their own budget. And as they go along, there's a little bubble that follows them around and tells them how they're doing relative to the deficit. It's interesting that, so often if you ask people, particularly Republicans, would you rather, to deal with the deficit, would you rather cut spending or increase taxes? And there's a tendency to go, there must be some programs to cut, right? But when they actually in front of all these programs, right, they cut very little. Now, Democrats do cut defense, Republicans cut it just a little, but they do cut it a little. Mostly, both Republicans and Democrats raise revenues, particularly on the wealthy, and some of it's rather robust, and some of those majorities are quite robust. So there really is a pretty strong consensus right now that taxes on the wealthy need to go up. For taxes on corporations, it's more complicated. There's more mix of feelings among Republicans. Overall, the majority supports it. Republicans are more ambivalent about it. I think they have concerns about what are our tax rates like internationally, or are we driving people out of the country, things like that. But for high income people, they're over 400,000. There's clearly a consensus, even when people have the opportunity to instead reduce spending in some other area, they come out on raising those taxes.
Three quick points here. Lots been said, but yes, I agree completely about the taxes on the rich. No question, solid majority support for that. But one thing that's interested me, and not many pollsters are asking it, is about whether or not Joe Biden is going to be able to avoid raising your taxes. Now, Americans have said no president for a very long time is going to be able to avoid raising their taxes. So that's always there in the background. And I think we have to be concerned about that. Yes, I think Americans do want and have wanted for a very long time to bring money home, as Celinda said, but they also recognize it's a really dangerous world. And you have to spend a lot on your military budget. So I think it's very hard to sort of parse that. On the racial resentment index, I think some of the reactions to the questions, that I'd like to see that index applied to some of these questions overall, but it seems to me America's a vast middle class country. And if you talk about entitlements, we're just generally more accepting for the vast middle class, which we are. And I think that's some of the explanation for what you see in that data. So there, I'll stop.
No, I think all very good points, and I'm glad you weighed in, Karlyn. Our next question is from Gloria DeBeck from the Chicago Council. And Gloria asks, what are the issues or provisions that are most likely to alter public opinion of the package as a whole, in your opinion?
I don't think I understand the question. Alter in what way?
Alter public opinion of the package as a whole.
Well, I guess the best way to answer that is where's the highest level of support, the most robust levels of support, and I would say that is in healthcare, being able to negotiate with Medicare, also providing expanding Medicare benefits to cover dental and vision and so on. Those really come home to people, so if I would say that if they had confidence that it was going to change, and people are really frustrated with healthcare, the cost of healthcare that just keeps going up, and all the problems that healthcare faces in this country, and there is this feeling that it doesn't have to be this way, that other countries are doing better than we are, and so if they had some confidence that needle was being moved, that would probably be the one single thing that would move support in favor of the package.
The other thing I would build on for that is, the package is very strongly supported now. It's just people have no idea what's in it, but they strongly support it. But seniors tend to be a little softer in their support because they think there's less in it for them. and leading with the prescription drug, leading with some of the Medicare expansion really gives, and the long-term care, frankly, really give seniors a stake in the game. That's not trivial politically, because as all of us know on this Zoom that seniors are going to be a higher proportion of the electorate in 2022, and they were also a real battleground between Biden and Trump, and Biden went to contest the seniors more aggressively than Democrats have in a while, ever since before 2008. So I would just add that to Stephen's point in terms of what would be the increase. And then to a point that Karlyn made earlier, one of the biggest other pressures out there is inflation. And one of the things that dealing with prescription drugs and expanding Medicare benefits does is it gives Democrats an easy way to talk about getting some prices and some costs down. And for women voters, the two costs that women are most worried about having increased: food and healthcare. So their shopping basket is different than men's shopping basket, and you're hitting one of their top two items. So it's like a threefer to emphasize that component of the plan. And if anything, I would say we're not emphasizing it enough.
Yeah, I think the healthcare issues are one of the hardy perennials of polling. They're always there. Public's always to keep the pressure on in terms of legislative action and broadening concerns that people have. And I think the Biden administration now, as they're pivoting again, there's so many issues and the news cycle changes so fast, but they are pivoting more to talking about the benefits for all people of the package rather than the focus on. They're trying to change the conversation a little bit, and I think that will be helpful to them. But I agree that those broad policies with the largest support, the healthcare concerns primarily, are just always with us.
And even I'm going to quick weigh in as well, just from my reporting, from what I've seen and from my conversations with leadership in Congress and the Senate. I know that the issues that they're hammering and trying to focus on messaging the most on, as Celinda one pointed out, was inflation. I think the pay fors for this package is going to be a big deal if they can pay for at least a substantial portion of this, if not all of it. And I also think two other points that are going to be very important are the climate change provisions in here, as well as childcare. I know that's something that the Biden administration and Senate and House leadership are really honing in on, and they think that can sway a lot of people. Childcare, particularly among the suburban voters that are the white whales of both parties. So, but I think we're out of time. I think we have to wrap up with this one. So thank you so much to our panel for joining us today. And thank you everyone who joined us to watch and participate in the discussion around this report. We will be following up with all of you via email tomorrow with a copy of the report. And for more information, please visit publicconsultation.org/reconciliation. Again, that is publicconsultation.org/reconciliation. And there you'll find the report and original research on proposals considered in the reconciliation budget. If you have any questions or would like a recording of this event, please contact them directly at jpthomas@vop.org.